assurance providers. So that's kind of looking at risk-based audit planning, and within our plans there'll also be an element of sort of compliance type audit, but a lot of our work now is risk-based, but we still cover compliance type audits. Looking at the IAA guidance on risk-based internal auditing, the IAA defines risk-based internal auditing as a methodology that links internal auditing to an organisation's overall risk management framework. It allows internal audit to provide assurance to the board that risk management processes are managing risks effectively in relation to the risk appetite of the organisation. The IAA has stated that over the last few years, the need to manage risks has become recognised as an essential part of good corporate governance practice. This has put organisations under increasing pressure to identify all the business risks they face and to explain how they manage them. And then furthermore, I'm going to say that while the responsibility for identifying and managing risks belongs to management, one of the key roles of internal audit is to provide assurance that those risks have been properly managed. So that's again a point that's been raised previously, is that the actual risk management process sits with the line, with managers within the line. The IA guidance on risk-based internal auditing goes on to explain about the implementation of risk-based internal auditing, and they've classified it in 3 main stages. On the Institute of Internal Auditors website, there's guidance on each of the key stages. So I'll just summarise those, which is stage 1 is assessing risk maturity. This is defined as obtaining an overview of the extent to which the board and management determine, assess, manage or monitor risks. This provides an indication of the reliability of the risk register for audit planning purposes. The second stage is periodic audit planning, which is defined as identifying the assurance and consulting assignments for a specific period, which is usually annually, by identifying, prioritising all those areas on which the board requires objective assurance, including the risk management process, the management of the key risks, and recording and reporting of risks. And then finally, stage 3 is the individual audit assignments. So these are the actual audits that are being carried out following that planning process. And this covers carrying out individual risk-based assignments to provide assurance on part of the risk management framework, including on the mitigation of individual or groups of risks. So this is looking at the work that's been identified by looking at the risk to achieving the organisation's objectives, and then narrowing that down into more specific work to test certain areas of those risks. The IAA also have a diagram on their website that shows the 3 stages we've just covered in a flow diagram. And you'll see from this, if you can see the slide, that it's an ongoing cycle involving reporting internal audit results to management and audit committees, which then feed back into the assessment of organisational risks and the internal audit planning process. So it's a continual cycle of assessing risks, going through the planning process, reporting to management, audit and risk committees, and feeding back into that process. So it's continually moving as the organisation develops and objectives change and the risk landscape changes. Again, the IAA guidance lists out some challenges and advantages to risk-based internal auditing. It starts off by explaining that it's at the cutting edge of internal audit practice, and as such it's evolving rapidly. But with that, there's little consensus about the best way to implement it. So it's sort of early stages. And also monitoring progress against an annual plan that is constantly changing can be a challenge. So it's about keeping up to date with those risks. But there are some advantages to this approach. You probably can't see that, but there's some. I'll just briefly run through these advantages. The internal audit should be able to conclude that, following risk-based internal audit approach, that management has identified, assessed and responded to risks above and below the organisation's risk appetite. The responses to the risks are effective but not excessive in managing inherent risks within the risk appetite. Where residual risks are not in line with risk appetite, action is being taken to remedy them. The risk management process, including effectiveness of responses and completion of actions, are being monitored by management to ensure they continue to operate effectively. Risk responses and actions are being properly classified and reported. This then in turn allows internal audit to provide the board with assurance that it needs in 3 key areas. And the first one is that risk management processes, both the design and how well they're working, management of those risks classified as key, including the effectiveness of controls and other responses to them, and complete, accurate and appropriate reporting and classification of risks. So there's a lot of advantages in there. There's a lot of work to do to implement risk-based internal auditing, but there are a lot of advantages. I'd like to just pause at that stage to see if there's any questions before we move on to having a look at the standards. No. Sorry. No. If we then take a look at the internal audit standards that relate to risk-based internal auditing, the Government Internal Audit Agency works to the public sector internal audit standards, and these are based on the mandatory elements of the Institute of Internal Auditors International Professional Practices Framework, and are intended to promote further improvement in the professionalism, quality, consistency and effectiveness of internal audit across the UK public sector. And so supporting those are the international standards of the Global Institute of Internal Auditors. So we as an agency work effectively to the global standards, but we've taken those and adopted them and adapted bits to fit with public sector requirements. I've picked out 3 key standards from the international standards relating to risk-based audit planning, and I've just briefly run through those for you. Standard 2010, which covers planning, says that the Chief Audit Executive must establish risk-based plans to determine the priorities of the internal audit activity consistent with the organisation's goals. There's an interpretation on that which basically says that the Chief Audit Executive is responsible for developing a risk-based plan, taking account of the organisation's risk management framework, which includes using the risk appetite levels set by management for the different activities or parts of the organisation. So again, there's a bit coming back there to it's the management to set the risk appetite, and it's for management to manage the risks. But if a framework doesn't exist, then that's when the Chief Audit Executive would use their own judgment of the risks after considering what input they've got from senior management and the board. And then the Chief Audit Executive must review and adjust the plan as necessary to respond to changes in the organisational business risks, operations, programmes and systems and controls. There is also an additional requirement in terms of the Government Internal Audit Agency. So there's a public sector requirement, and again, as I say, we've used the standards but sort of put in some of our own interpretation. So a requirement for the UK public sector is that the risk-based plan must take into account the requirement to produce an annual internal audit opinion and the assurance framework. So the annual opinion is what the head of internal audit has to provide an annual opinion and the accounts for the department that they are the head of audit for. So the plan has to have enough coverage to enable the head of internal audit to provide that opinion within the accounts, and also to review the department's management's opinion on their systems of control to make sure that they're based on factual evidence. So that the plan has to cover those elements. The next standard is 2120, risk management. So this states that the internal audit activity must evaluate the effectiveness and contribute to the improvement of risk management processes. So again, there is an interpretation of this which basically states that determining whether the risk management processes are effective is a judgment resulting from internal audit's assessment as to whether the organisational objectives support and align with the organisation's mission, and that significant risks are identified and assessed. Then goes on to cover appropriate risk responses. So again, the risk management processes will be monitored through ongoing management activities, separate evaluations of both. So there's an element of the organisation's management have a role within this as well. So it's really working with the organisation's management. Then finally, the third standard that I've picked out is 2600, which is communicating the acceptance of risks. So this states that when the Chief Audit Executive concludes that management has accepted a level of risk that may be unacceptable to the organisation, the Chief Audit Executive must discuss the matter with senior management. If the Chief Audit Executive determines that the matter has not been resolved, then they must communicate the matter to the board. So again, that's given a view on the overall sort of risk management. There is again an interpretation on the IA's website that basically summarises this by saying that the identification of risk accepted by management may be observed through an assurance and consulting engagement monitoring process on actions taken by management as a result of prior engagement or other means. It then goes on to state that it's not the responsibility of the Chief Audit Executive to resolve the risks. So again, it's very much senior management within the organisation managing the risks, and internal audit giving a view on how those risks have been managed. In terms of the three main standards, that's the sort of three key ones. But is there any, before we head on to the next section, are there any questions on anything so far? Okay. If we then move on to look at risk management processes, and again, bearing in mind, obviously, as I just said, that the risk management process is the responsibility of management within the organisation. But internal audit have a responsibility to look at it and make sure that the processes are fit for purpose, basically. So if we just run through this slide, and if we ask the question, what is a risk? The standard definition is an uncertain event that, should it occur, will affect the achievement of objectives. So again, it's that link back to the organisation's objectives. And then the question of what is risk management? It's the systematic identification and assessment of risks and the planning and implementation of risk responses. So again, we have a definition of risk, and again, the thing that risk management sits with, very much with management. There is, within the Government Internal Audit Agency, some guidance that has a typical risk management framework, and it covers five areas. So we've got, first part is to clarify the objectives. Second part, identify the risks. Number 3, assess the risks. Number 4, address the risks. And then number 5, review and report on the risks. So if we just take a brief look at the key points under each of those. So if we go back to step 1, which is clarifying objectives, we need to establish what the organisation is trying to achieve, by when, and who is accountable. So again, it's something that's come up in conversations earlier in the day is about accountability. And there needs to be someone accountable for the delivery of the objectives. So it's establishing what that is, by when, and who's accountable. The next step is to identify the risks. So within that, the first task is to identify the risks associated with activities and tasks that the organisation is responsible for delivering. Then the next step, assessing the risks. So under this, in our guidance, it mentions that you should have a comprehensive risk assessment process, which can enable managers to prioritise and concentrate resources on those key risks which have an impact on the achievement of objectives. So again, it's going back to the key risks against the achievement of the organisation's objectives. Because basically the organisation, with its objectives, that's what it's setting out to do, and we need to help give assurance over whether the risks are being managed that are affecting the achievement of those. Then step 4, which is addressing the risks. The next step is to decide what actions should be taken to manage the identified risks, and there are a number of different actions, and I'll just run through the key ones that are listed in the guidance that we use at the agency. Is treat the risks, so establish systems and controls, tolerate it, accept the consequences, transfer it to a third party, so it could be someone carrying an action for you, or it could be an insurance policy, it's transferring the risk to someone else. Terminate the risk, cease the activity. Or take the risk, which I think is very similar to tolerate the risk, but it's take it if the benefits outweigh the risk. So if everything works out well and the benefits of taking the risk are far outweigh the risk itself, management may wish to take the risk. But again, it's all about managing the risk and taking a view on what should be done. Then step 5, review, reporting and escalation. The points raised in our guidance are develop appropriate responses to all problems that arise with risks, and including top risks and business critical projects, and that this is a management responsibility. The audit committee of the organisation should receive status reports concerning the top risks and business critical projects at each of their meetings. So these reports will take the form of risk registers. It could be strategic risks, could be the top finance risks, that the things that management think are important and that should be raised at the audit committee. They should also be raised at the board, but again, it's that management's responsibility to raise these things, and at the audit committee meetings, internal audit maybe asked to give a view on the mitigation actions, and certainly the reports that are presented to the audit committees will address certain risks within those reports and give an audit opinion. The next slide looks at different types of risks. And again, in our audit planning within the Government Internal Audit Agency in the UK, we look at a couple of different types of risks, and then through looking at what type of risks they are, it determines how we deal with them. So there's what we class as, on the left-hand side, is business as usual risks, and then on the other side we've got exceptional risks. We would tend to look more at the exceptional risks. So if I just run through what the business as usual risks are first. These would cover things like a risk that is managed through existing control framework and corporate processes. But that's not to say that we wouldn't look at those processes or the control framework as part of a compliance audit. We still do compliance work, but in terms of working out which risks to focus on, we would be over on the other side. Again, business as usual risks can be corrected through the rectification of existing controls. So if it's just a control needs to be amended to address the risk. And again, monitoring focuses on assurances in place and are managed through the assurance framework. So we tend to have a bit less focus on the business as usual risks and try and focus to add value more on the exceptional risks. And these are listed as having a finite life, require the establishment of a new or enhanced risk mitigation or control, which again we can, as internal audit, give advice on how to develop those controls, what they might be. And upon mitigation, it becomes business as usual. So once the mitigation actions have the risk under control, it may be that it moves over to the other side. It's seen as business as usual. We would still keep an eye on those risks, but again, to add most value, we'd be trying to do some work over on the exceptional risk side. And the exceptional risks would be managed at an appropriate level through either strategic or operational risk registers. So again, a lot of these exceptional risks are sitting at the top end of an organisation. Very big risks that could impact on the organisation delivering its objectives, and they're the sorts of areas that audit committees and boards are interested in terms of how it affects their business and the delivery of their objectives. The next slide looks at the 3 lines of defence, and I know that earlier sessions today have kind of gone into the detail of the 3 lines of defence. So I won't go into that in too much detail, but this is a version of it that in the Government Internal Audit Agency we use, and you'll notice that it's not actually 3 lines, it's 4. Because we've added an extra line on, and that is the National Audit Office. They are the government's external auditors, and they have an oversight and overview of all of the other areas. So in terms of completeness, this 4th level, as it were, has been put on purely for our purposes. So we've got the National Audit Office looking at what we're doing. And that's something that's been raised in other sessions as well, as to ensure independence is having the work of internal audit reviewed by other bodies. And we have our work reviewed by the National Audit Office, and we've also had the Institute of Internal Auditors in to do some external quality assurance on our work, on independence, but also on the work that we cover, to make sure that we're focusing on the areas that are adding most value. At that point, I'd like to just pause again for any questions.
I'd rather speak in English. In Greek, says the lady. Could you give us an example from your experience out of an audit that you have gotten involved in? An example relevant to the drafting of a public procurement agreement. If there you have foreseen specific exceptional risks, and if you have managed to cope with them efficiently and sufficiently, or if you failed and you lost actually your objective because you didn't come up with the expected outcomes. By observing, of course, all confidentiality terms and rules, I don't know whether you have any kind of similar reserves. Could you give us an example?
Great, thank you for the question. I haven't personally been involved in the audit of procurement agreements, but within the UK government we have sort of commercial functions that specialise in contracts for procurement, and we have certain levels and the value of the contracts as to the different levels of approval that these should go through. And the Cabinet Office in government, which looks after central government, also has a specialist functional team that oversee the work of the contract specialists within government. So certainly in terms of drafting procurement agreements, there are processes that departments have to go through to get these checked by people with expertise in those fields. That's not to say that things don't go wrong, and there is, I can probably say who it is because it's going through the UK Public Accounts Committee, but just in case, I probably won't say the name. But there is a client that is associated with a new client that I'm going to take on, and so I've been kind of getting up to speed with an issue there where there was a contract that was let before a lot of these new controls were in place, and there have been a number of problems with the contract to the extent where the National Audit Office and the UK Public Accounts Committee have asked the accounting officer to come forward and answer questions on the negotiation of the contract. So there are a lot of processes in place. Any other questions at this stage? If there's no, oh, sorry.
Personally, I would like to know more concerning the structure of the operation of the internal audit in the UK. What I mean, can you tell us how the different bodies, all the services relevant to internal audit in UK are structured? They are under government agency. It is the internal audit is performed at the municipal level, at state government level. What are the different levels?
Right. Thank you for the question. In the UK, there are, as you say, a number of different levels. If I speak about the public sector, because then there's other rules for the private sector in terms of who's listed on the stock market and what have you. But if I focus on the public sector, the Government Internal Audit Agency covered this morning as to how we're growing and taking in more and more government departments with the aim that we will cover all of the central government departments and provide the audit service to those government departments. So that's, in terms of core central government departments, that's where the internal audit activity will sit. There's also local authorities that are elected bodies that look after local services, and they receive a budget, and they have an accounting officer who's responsible for managing that budget and is accountable as to how that money is spent. Within those local authorities, they have their own internal audit arrangements. So they sit separately to the Government Internal Audit Agency, because the Government Internal Audit Agency focuses on the accounting officers within central government. Then you have accounting officers within local authorities. They have their own internal audit arrangements. And then sitting around, and the diagram that was up previously is the National Audit Office, and they're the government's external auditors. So they will, at the end of the year, when the accounts for the department are put together, the National Audit Office will carry out work to validate the accounts and give an opinion on the accounts, but also make a statement as to whether they can place reliance on the work of the Government Internal Audit Agency. So they give an opinion on our work. So there's those kind of different levels. There's the local level, then there's the agency that looks after central government, and then there's the NEO that oversees what we're doing.
And again, the proposals, to what extent they are binding, the proposals submitted at the end of the year, for both sides, the government, the local level, the government, is it the proposals submitted by the Internal Audit Committee, are they binding vis-à-vis the government?
Hi, thank you for that. Can I just check what you mean by proposals? Do you mean annual plans or? Annual plans, yeah. Well, through the planning process, I mean, there's the diagram that was up first of all, and there's different levels of things we would look at, and the last line in there was sort of stakeholder. Sorry. Yeah, no, sorry. It's no, absolutely. It's very small. Yeah, sorry. But the final line, which covered stakeholder engagement, so that would be senior management within the organisation. So we would, as an internal audit, come up with some ideas for a draft plan based on all the activity we would do, including reviewing risk registers and looking at previous audit work and business objectives and what have you. We would also have discussions with senior management within different areas of the business, so maybe directors of certain areas of the business. We would then meet with more senior management to discuss what we've prepared, and then ultimately with the accounting officer who heads the government department. We would also have informal discussions with members of the audit committee, particularly the audit chair, outside of audit committee meetings to discuss the plan we have so far, so that when we take the plan to the audit and risk committee, it doesn't come as a surprise as to what's in there. So then at the audit committee, the aim or the hope is that we're turning up with a plan that people recognise and that they see as what they need. If not, or if there's any issues, then that's where a lot of discussion will happen. The plan may get signed off there, or we may need to go away and do a bit more work on it, bring in some other areas or take some areas out. Once the plan is agreed, then that is the plan that we will have signed up to deliver. But through the year, again, if the risk landscape changes, if new issues come up, we can go back to senior management and back to the Audit and Risk Committee and say, we don't feel this audit is relevant anymore because these things have changed or these new risks have come up. We feel we should be doing some work on this. So it's binding in the sense that if nothing changes, we have to deliver it, but it can change in year. if risks change. Yeah.
Tommy?
Oh. Ήθελα να ρωτήσω, υπάρχουν στο Ηνωμένο...
Are there in the UK services where, how to put it, the internal audit is performed by external auditors? In other words, in public hospital, what is the case? It is very strange that internal audit in several hospitals is assigned to external auditors, both concerning the waste management and the operational audit. They are both assigned to external auditors. And I'm speaking here in Greece. In Greece, okay.
Question. In terms of, I'm not experienced in what goes on in hospitals in detail. However, within the UK, there are a number of external audit, well, the audit firms that provide different services. Some of those services are external, and they also have they provide internal audit services, and they have provided the internal audit service to government departments, and indeed the agency has partners with a number of these firms to draw on resource or expertise where we don't have the expertise or the resource available. And there have been models in the past where these firms deliver the whole of the audit service to a public organisation. Although they're external firms, they have to act in the same way as internal audit would do. And one of the reasons for the development of the Government Internal Audit Agency was to try and get to a position where less reliance was placed on external firms providing internal audit service. And what I mean by that is that if we have the more experience we have in certain types of audits across the agency, the more we can provide the work rather than having to draw in people from outside to do that at a sort of, well, a much higher cost than public sector. Thank you.
Tommy, just a question. Okay, there are actually two questions. One is, can you tell us how you promote independence of your audit function? And then number two, can you talk to us about how you measure risk? Like, can you give us some examples about like how you actually decided which program or service was more riskier than another one, and how did you go about that?
Yeah, great. Thanks for that question. In terms of the independence point, there's a number of things that we do to help ensure the independence of the agency. Within the client organisations, there is the audit committee, and if I sort of talk about it in the sense of that there's just one client for the moment. Obviously, the agency has multiple clients, but if I just focus on if there was just the one, where we have an audit committee. The Departmental Audit Committee has non-executive directors in attendance at the committee, and the audit committees also have the audit chair is a departmental non-executive director, and their role is to bring in external challenge to the department, but also to how we performed in terms of internal audit, and the audit committee will challenge us on the work we've done, how we've done the work, and the findings and recommendations we've come up with. So that's one step. We also work to the public sector internal audit standards that this morning I was saying are based on the global IA standards, and within those, the standards on independence and objectivity that we need to work to. And to ensure that we are actually doing that, within the Government Internal Audit Agency, this morning I made reference to the Directorate of Professional Practices within the agency. Not only do they kind of help in terms of ensuring consistency of the approach to how we do our work in terms of guidance, they also carry out reviews, they call it cold reviews, so they'll pick some audits at random. It may not be at random, but they pick some out, and they will go through to make sure that the audit has been carried out to the right standards, and that it meets the public sector standards. We've also just had an external quality review by the IIA, so they've come in to look at the work of the agency, and part of that is making sure that it follows the standards, including acting in an independent way. And we've also got the National Audit Office due to come in very shortly to do a review of some of the work that's been carried out by the agency, again similar to the Institute of Internal Auditors work. But the National Audit Office will be looking at all our working papers, picking some audits, going through the working papers and ensuring that they've been carried out in the right way. And again, they'll be looking to ensure that they've been done independently, that the working papers and all the findings lead through to the finished product. In terms of the sort of risk management question and how we measure risk, with risk management being the responsibility of management, each of the departments that we audit will have a risk management framework and a process to follow in terms of developing risk registers and how they score risks. And a lot of them will follow the same kind of pattern, so you'll have pre-mitigation likelihood and impact, and post-mitigation likelihood and impact. These are usually scores. A lot of them will do a score of 1 to 5. So if it's a score of 1 to 5 for likelihood and a score of 1 to 5 for impact, you multiply the two together. Whatever score you get puts you somewhere on a list, on your risk register, sorry. But in order to score them, there has to be a department level process that has certain criteria. So it may be to score a 5 on impact. It could be that the impact could be a financial loss of over so many million pounds. So it's all laid out by the department as to how these things will be scored. We would then work with the department to make sure that the process they've put in place is fit for purpose and give advice if it isn't. So we work very much within the framework that those departments set, and we will use their risk registers to determine what risks we'll focus in on. But we will also use our own view of the department and its risk landscape. So going back to the issue of the strategic risks and the delivery of objectives, if we feel that the risks that are being reported to the board and the audit committee aren't related to delivery of objectives, they're actually much lower down, then we would give an opinion on that. So we use the department's scoring system, but we also give assurance over whether it really makes sense. Any other questions at this point? No. Okay. Timing-wise, we'll be finishing at 3:30, so we've got a little bit of time left. What I wanted to do to finish the section and to stimulate a bit more of sort of discussion is if people could have, I'll read through these questions because you probably won't be able to see them. If people could have in small groups discussions around the approach to risk-based audit planning that you have in your organisation, how the approaches differ between your organisations, how those approaches differ to what we've just discussed, and a kind of some thoughts on what levels of awareness of risk management processes exist within your organisation. And through all of that, having some thoughts as to what could be done differently to improve or implement risk-based audit planning, risk management processes, and if there's anything that you as individuals might do to help make those improvements. Hi.
I think that our biggest problem is that internal audit in Greece is not exactly risk management. It is oppressive in a way or another. Therefore, there is a big differentiation on what you are asking us to do comparing to what we do as internal auditors or bodies of internal auditors. We do not have an advanced system for risk management as yet, but therefore we cannot possibly, I don't know, answer to this question as far as I am concerned. I would like to compliment that that was the situation on internal audit that was applied. But with the new standards and the way the units of internal audit are being planned, we have the risk assessment and risk planning included, because I believe that only from the management we can take into consideration the risk factors in order to plan and organize internal audit. Yes, this already applies. The standards and methodologies exist, so internal audits can organize their program from the management. That is to say, Ministry of Education, the financial authorities of the Ministry of Education can detect, identify some areas where the audits may begin. That's how we make a starting point. No sound? Now, the first question had to do with the management. The second question, in some organizations, perhaps you cannot do it through the management, therefore you are talking with the personnel department. Therefore, you can detect, you can identify the risk and the audit in another field. Is that risk management or not? That's the question.
It's not.
Then in my opinion, it's not risk management.
Okay, that's sorry. I'm inspectors, controllers, body for public administration. So I'm referring to my opinion and my experience. It's not the same for all the bodies, all the agencies. Sorry, that's it.
Inspectors, public, your organization. Given the number of complaints that you guys manage in any one year, there's a lot, right? How do you decide which ones are higher risk and more urgent than others? Or do you treat them all the same?
Okay.
We have a plan, an annual plan that sets the objectives for every field of this inspectorate body. This targeting plan or prioritization plan is compiled after publications that we have in the press or citizens' complaints based on their content, their interest. What I mean interest? Interest regarding the proper operation of the public administration. This, I do not personally believe we can put it under the title risk management. It is experience that derives from facts, events that have taken place. Actions of the management that have already taken place. We do not program for any possible risks that may take place in the future, that will take place or they are programmed to take place. In my opinion, risk management is what you mention when you have risks or actions that may happen in the future. We haven't reached this level yet, and we program our actions for actions of the management that have already taken place, not that will take place. Therefore, the level in which internal audit in the United Kingdom is completely different to the internal audit that we have and is operating in Greece. We audit already concluded cases. And based on our experience, we may say, because, for example, I come for urban planning projects, our orientation is to audit projects or contracts that have been concluded. A public works project that has been concluded and delivered. A license, for example, a construction license that has already been implemented, and we see, for example, during the implementation phase that it faces some problems. Therefore, the level of auditing that we do is completely different to what has just been mentioned regarding the UK. Perhaps you should clarify at this point that these auditors are not units of internal audit. Well, there is some the body of inspectorates of the public administration. That's what is the title according to the law. We are an independent agency, independent body. That we are external on the internal or internal on the external, but we do internal audits. Altogether now, there is no possibility. One by one, there is no possibility. Regarding General Accounting Office and fiscal audits, we do audits everywhere in the National Accounting Office as well. But I don't think this is up to the conversation who does what and why. The discussion has to do on whether we can answer to the question, the audit that we do in Greece, is it risk management or not? My answer is that it's not risk management yet. Someone perhaps may have a different point of view. I belong to the same agency with Mrs. Kizana. I agree 100% with what she said. I would like to add that risk management and forecasting that during the process of an audit, let's say of a public works project or public procurement, at a great extent in Greece or in our agency, is based at a great extent on experience. The experience that we have gained from similar audits that we have done in the past. That means we know what the red flags are in a public procurement, in a public project. We know what the contract is, we know the implementation or the deliverable. We are aware more or less of the problems that may arise. This is the business as usual, I think, as you mentioned it. Of course, there are the exceptional cases, that is to say, the risks that may arise all of a sudden, and you go to an organization or a body or a departmental service, and there's no cooperation between the head of the department and the employees, and you have to audit a process that people do not speak with each other, for example. This is a huge risk that you have to manage in order to produce a result for which you have been given the orders to produce. Now, the fact that we audit procurements, processes, projects that have already been concluded. Yes, indeed, this is the case, but because technology, we have everything computerized and we have lots of data digitalized. You said earlier on that you do not check the transaction, you audit all the transactions because you have an Excel file, let's say, and you can draw conclusions to see the fraud, to see the divergence, to see something that you don't really like. So you may create a systemic risk, if you like, and to give some piece of advice, either not for this thing to happen again or to legislate this transaction system or payment system so that you can avoid this risk, which may be on purpose or not on purpose. But for public procurements, I would like to say to Ms. Sakrevopoulou or to the administrative audit that we do, it is difficult to do a real-time audit and have disciplinary actions or processes of divergence, because during these public contracts, we have conflicting interests, and our role is very difficult on real time. For example, when you have a contract that is in place, it is difficult to go back and say that the contract should not have been concluded before they start the project works. However, technology helps, and perhaps your work, because it has to do with financial data and not administrative audit, perhaps real time is much easier. We are always having to do with already finished cases, and the situation is blurry there, and everything depends on the experience of the auditor. I would like to clarify, first of all, in order to agree today and tomorrow's discussion. When we talk audit, we are talking about something that has been concluded, finished. It is not control. I'm not checking a contract that is. We are auditing a contract after the conclusion, and we make recommendations so same mistakes will not be repeated, or to improve parts of the process that did not work well. This is what the audit is. Regards the planning, programming, whether it is an administrative audit or the Ministry of Health or Public Works or General Accounting Office or the European Commission, all bodies, all services must have some kind of planning, programming, must have some kind of planning, and then to program, to create a time schedule for the audits. And these audits will derive from some risks. Complaints is a measure, because if you have repeatedly complaints about a specific issue, you have to program audits towards this direction. And if you have some agencies, departments that they tell you, I do not have the appropriate personnel or the problems with guaranteeing or providing pensions or whatever, auditors are the ones that have something, a project that has already finished, a situation that has already finished, and we try to take action so that this thing will never be repeated. In the General Accounting Office, we copied the system that was imposed by the European Commission, because we have norms from the third community support framework, and it is not a financial or fiscal audit. We are the third defense line, and we work together with internal audit and internal bodies. We must be all together. This is the internal audit in our country. It exists for years now, but it takes a different shape, a different form with the units. I know how your agency works. Comment off the microphone. I repeat, comment off the microphone.
Thank you very much for that. So there was one here, and then one over there, and one there. So, yeah, thank you.
I would just simply like to say that we could have excellent information and have a risk management and assessment if we could evaluate and exploit the material of the reports, which, in my opinion, is not exploited. We do not draw any conclusions from the reports. We exploit the complaints in order to make the audit. However, this material of the reports remains unexploited, and I think this could give us significant, excellent information and material to work on.
Question at the back, please.
From the discussion, I have realized that we have a problem of terminology in internal audit. Now, internal audit, how the strategy of the organization is aligned together with its objectives. Therefore, we start that for every organization in the Greek public administration, there is no strategy or methodology that has been recorded. Therefore, empirically, they are setting their targets because there is no platform, no software that can do that. In extraordinary cases, some cases are used in risk management, but unfortunately they do not exist. You said that your own agency cooperates with the National Strategy Agency, and they have set the risk management, and they align. In Greece, please switch off this mobile phone. Right now, we do not have the tools and technological tools and risk management, not only on the level of internal audit, but also on the level of central administration and organizations. And moreover, I would like to set forward two questions. What kind of software do you use? How do you receive all this data and then you make the alignment? The only platform that we have implemented as a General Secretary of the Ministry of Economics was for other kinds of audits, risk management. It is impossible with these phones on. We can't hear anything. We just listen to the mobile phone. It's the mobile phone only on the sound. So, what tools do you use for risk management? What kind of software do you have? And also, what kind of knowledge or training, how well have they been trained, your auditors? Because I understand that they know about statistics, management, risks. What kind of training do they do? Because that is where the reform should take place for the Greek public sector, public administration, sorry.
Great, thank you for that question. In terms of risk management, we don't use software for identifying risks. And say the processes we use are looking at the organisation's risk maturity and whether they have processes in place and proper risk registers for us to use. If they don't, then we would give an opinion on that. So we don't use software, we use the intelligence from the organisation. In terms of training, within the Government Internal Audit Agency in the UK, above a certain level, you have to have audit qualifications. That can be from the Institute of Internal Auditors, it can be accountancy bodies. But the expectation is that everybody will undertake some form of formal training. In terms of more specialist areas, we have people who, through their careers, have chosen to go down specialist paths, and we've been working on developing groups of specialist interest within the agency, and where we have audits that or audit work that needs to be done, but we really don't have the expertise. We have partnership arrangements with some of the major accountancy firms that operate around the world, but obviously the UK-based ones, and on occasions we have to bring in expertise from there. Yeah.
One more, and then I think we'll have to wrap it up.
Actually, it's not a question. I will try to provide some help, if I can. Νομίζω ότι από αυτά που άκουσα...
I believe, listening to the comments, the questions, a very strong discussion on risk assessment and risk management, we need to clarify that risk management is not performed by the internal audit. To manage a risk means you decide concerning the risk appetite that you need to absorb. There is those that I need to block and those that I'm prepared to receive, which cannot be performed by an internal auditor. If everything is okay, if all obstacles are overcome, it performs risk assessment. In other words, it assesses the risk, and based on the assessment, it prepares tools and so on and so forth there where the weak points of an organization might be located. We haven't got an internal risk-based audit. We are not speaking about that. To avoid confusion, we need to say that there are small isolates. I'm internal auditor in a public utility service. There, it is mandatory, based on our agreement, to have a risk-based internal audit. If everything goes okay, well, one thing. If not, well, in our case, the culture of the public utility service is not risk-based, and there we are to introduce this concept, we internal auditors, and teach them what is in risk-based thinking, so that they adopt such a culture, and then we perform with internal audit. We still got a long way ahead to work on. So in good faith and working in close cooperation, I think we can achieve everything. Thank you. I'll be very brief. Following what I've heard from the internal auditor of the Public Utility Service, I wish to ask the following. When the internal audit of a department, of an independent agency, of a service, when it succeeds through an audit in reducing, in mitigating a risk in terms of risk management, when this is not integrated in the internal audit, at least as an advice, as a piece of advice, to put it this way. Well, I apologize. No, you haven't asked me. Okay.
End of the question, but if I just say in terms of kind of if there's risks identified within an organisation and then a client department, then the actions to mitigate the risk, if they're successful, then they'll bring the risk score down, which will drop the risk down the hierarchy of risks of something's reported to the board, but the risk mitigations are very good and successful and reduce the overall risk rating, then that would come off of the board risk register. Sorry if I didn't get the right end of the question. Thank you very much.
and I would like to congratulate the organizing committee on preparing this event. I told earlier to Mr. Hunt that those working in the private sector sometimes will have a different view regarding the situation in the public sector. Today, meeting all those interesting people, listening to those excellent lectures, I need to congratulate you all. I'm Vera Marmalidou. I'm chair of the Hellenic Institute of Internal Auditors, IIA, and I'm here to talk to you concerning our contribution, the contribution of IIA in the internal audit of the public sector. The IIA in Greece are the Hellenic Institute, why an auditor needs to be certified, and then we'll discuss the international framework, the IPPF of the IIA, the additional material that was produced by IIA. I'll propose certain issues concerning the efficiency of internal audit in the public sector, and last but not least, we'll see what it can be achieved. The IIA was founded in 1941 in the US with more than 190,000 members in more than 170 countries. IIA recently celebrated its 75 years, and throughout those years it has been leading professionals in the sector, promoting the value that is created by those professionals. It provides training, tools, international certifications, and mainly the standards and guidance. In other words, the international professional practice framework. It produces research work thanks to IIA Foundation. Their members are mainly internal auditors and professionals in risk management and regulatory compliance. It creates bonds and communication between its members in an excellent way. IIA in Greece, the Hellenic Institute, has a history of 35 years. We are the certified body of IIA in Greece, and we have currently more than 700 active members and many friends. This is our website and our address. It is managed by a 7-member board, where myself and all other elected members are elected on a 3-year basis. Our vision is as follows. Whenever speaking about internal audit, we wish to be the point of reference, IIA Greece. And I would like to thank you all, because for the first time in a public sector meeting, I've heard references on IIA and of the Greek Institute. We promote the implementation of international standards, both in the private and the public sector, and we focus on promoting our profession and our professional certifications. We provide excellent service to our members, and we nurture ethics and communication on the basis of solidarity and communication between our members. Few words on certifications. Those are data from the International Institute in 2016. Globally, there are 140,000 certified internal auditors, SIA. Take into account that we're speaking about 190,000 members globally, 70% are certified internal auditors. 70% for us means that our groups, our internal audit groups, need to have this benchmark. 7 out of the 10 need to be certified. There are other certifications. One of some kind of an interest is CGAP, relevant to the auditors in the public sector. Why be a certified internal auditor? First of all, because you acquire knowledge through the good practices in the market. You demonstrate that you are capable, that you are knowledgeable, and that you are professional. You speak, we speak all together the same language. And you set the basis for a continuous improvement and development. To maintain this certification, you need ongoing work. You need to join and attend seminars so as to be continuously updated. And of course, you excel. And you... Let me add something more. The US questionnaire produced by our friends Americans demonstrated that a certified auditor is paid 43% higher compared to a non-certified. The definition of internal audit, according to IIA, and what is its role in the public sector. I do not wish to tire you, but it has been referred earlier this morning by Mr. Christou. And essentially our work is to conduct audits, special audits or investigations and internal engagements. And through those audits and controls, we provide to our organization, to our department, an independent certification and assurance that the risk management, the governance, and the internal audit system operates in a reliable and successful way. And through this definition, based on this definition, we understand the role of the internal auditor in the public sector, which is unique. Why? Because all internal auditors in the private sector, our firms rather, are focused on their clients, which is a part, and through our works, we make money. However, you work for the entire population, and the benefit of your work is going to embrace the entire population of this country. And again, the services of your organizations have a totally different non-profit character. And of course, for this reason, you are very important. Thus, beyond your independent opinion, your work, you support the concept of accountability, of integrity, and the improvement of the operations of your agencies. You enhance the trust and of all stakeholders. In other words, the citizens, the officers, the elected or appointed officers, the media, as mentioned by Mr. Hunt, I assume earlier, and above all, you support the governance in the public sphere. You've been listening to standards. What are those standards? IIA has issued the International Professional Practices Framework, IPPF. Its aim is to achieve a level of standardization irrespective to the peculiarities and the sector, be it private or public. So it has issued this framework, it has published this set of principles. You can see this circle on the slide. The mandatory on top, the non-mandatory at the bottom. When an internal audit unit complies with the standards, needs to follow this blue segment on the slide. What is this? The standards. A series of principles and values and guidelines as to how you perform your work on a daily basis. The definition of internal audit, which was developed earlier this morning. We all have a code of ethics, and we are engaged and bound by this code. We've got 10 core principles for the first time. What I mean by first time, of course, they existed and they've involved all standards. However, for the first time, we have a list of those values because our friends back in the States love things to be clear. We are independent, we are reliable, we have a code of ethics, we look forward, we have future perspectives, and several more principles. So those are the 4 points of the mandatory IPPF. The non-mandatory explain somehow the standards, and certain organizations, even though we conform with the standards, we conform with the implementation guidelines and several other assistant tools, and so on and so forth. Thus, this framework altogether is there to facilitate internal auditors and the external audit so that it achieves its mission, so that it fulfills its mission. In other words, to enhance and to add value to an organization by providing risk-based and independent assurance. Since you are in the Secretariat General against fraud and corruption, let us take those two standards. Internal auditors must have sufficient knowledge to evaluate the risk of fraud. 1210 principle. However, we do not be experts, special investigators dealing exclusively with the assessment and detection of fraud. And 1220 standard, internal auditors must exercise due professional care by considering the probability of fraud, which was analyzed in an excellent way earlier. 2060, the chief audit executive must report periodically to senior management and the board on fraud risks. And again, 2120, the internal audit team, its activity, need to evaluate continuously the potential for the occurrence of fraud and how the organization manages fraud risk. And a last standard, 2210, the internal auditors, when they begin an audit, need to have a level of fraud awareness. In other words, be prepared and bear always in mind that the item under control might involve some kind of fraud. IIA has produced 3 manuals on fraud and corruption. Those on the slide, they are all in English. The Institute shall attempt to translate them. Working together with a partner from the public sphere, we have tried, we are having in progress this project, mainly on identified fraud through IT procedures and how an auditor may audit anti-bribery programs. Now let us see how IIA supports internal audit in the public sector. First of all, it founded a public sector committee, a committee which works on the public sector exclusively and has produced 5 manuals which describe in detail everything concerning governance in the public sector, how we can establish an internal audit function from the very beginning, how an audit committee needs to be in the public sector so that it is independent, how we can set policies for internal audit in the absence of legislation, and the 9 elements required for internal audit effectiveness in the public sector. Those 5 items are in the process of approval, translated in a concise way. So it is worth trying to have them all translated. It shall be good for you. Now, the 9 conditions for independence. Independence in terms of organizational structure. In other words, those public units need to be independent. I was impressed earlier this morning listening to the lady from Belgium and Mr. Terry Hand speaking and referring to those 3 models. I was impressed and I'm working in the private sector. However, Mr. Hand, irrespective to the model utilized in the public sector, the thing is whether the units shall be independent or not. This is critical. The IIA gives certain practical advice concerning the methods to have an independent internal audit. First of all, the head, the chief audit executive, needs to give all reports to the board. By itself is very important. We've been referring to a board of directors. Now, the IIA, based on the new standards in effect as of January 2017, we might be referring to a board of directors, a supervisory board, a board of trustees, or just an individual from the leadership of the department of the ministry, however, without executive competencies, thus being independent. Now, from now on, a board can be even as an individual, however, fully independent. And she sends the reports to this board, and the board approves the appointment of the head of the internal audit. It is the board suspends its mandate, and this board approves the annual audit plan and approves the human resources depending on your needs, so that you are independent, so that you have money allocated accordingly. Practically, this is the way that you can remain independent. Despite the model adopted, you need to be independent. And of course, you need an official mandate, be it a ministerial decision, be it a political, whatever. You need to be very careful, because your charter must describe your role, the scope of your work, the responsibilities, your authority, the reports that you need to forward, to whom you submit them, and of course the standards that you apply in your work. And you need to have limitless access to data, the wealth of individuals, of people, of entities. I've heard somewhere, and I was surprised, that an auditor at a lower level, hierarchical level, cannot audit a senior one, which is impossible. And of course, you need sufficient financial and human resources, and your leadership, the head of the audit team, needs to have SODA and be certified, have experience in internal audit, be well knowledgeable of the organization. Your units need to be manned by people that are active, that they are allowed to act, well qualified, and possibly certified. Why not? You need to be objective. Your work should not be biased by anyone. No conflict of interest between your personal ones and those of the organization. You need to be supported by all stakeholders. This is critical, and I mean the state, the government, the citizens. Unless you have such support, you won't be able to work. The more we understand the role, the more we respect you, and the more we will be supporting you. And of course, you need to apply the standards. Sometime earlier, we had an event hosted by the Institute of Alpha Bank, and the deputy chair explained everything with regard to the new standards applied, being in effect as of January 2017. Now, the II Greece and how it can help you. In two ways. First, by helping you improve your professional profile, and in applying the standards. Concerning the first one, what we can do, we conduct seminars, we deliver seminars with high participation from the public sector as well, where you can learn a lot of things concerning the draft assessment, drafting an annual plan, how you produce a report, and so on and so forth. We provide the certification through the IIA, and you can be certified at any age. A young auditor could get a certification in 3 or 6 months. In my case, it took me 18 because I'm older. However, you can do it. I've got many daily tasks back in with my family. However, I succeeded in getting it. Of course, you need to know English. You need to learn the terminology. We organize events. And concerning the second part, the implementation of the standards, allow me a parenthesis to thank you for inviting us here today. Well, we can assist you as well, and we produced some kind of different work, those translation of the standards on a volunteer basis, and certain practical advice. All those years being involved in the internal audit, let me tell you a few things how fraud and corruption can be detected in the public sector. I repeat once again, you need to be independent. Your report on fraud cannot be given to the person that has produced such fraud. Assessment of fraud and anti-corruption programs. And whistleblowing procedures, you need to assess those as well. And you need to promote not only control activities, but a set of internal audit principles, an entire system which involves the entire department where you work. As an internal audit system of a department involves not only the mechanisms in place, but how this board, as defined earlier, can oversight the organization. Are the policies and strategies observed and implemented? The rules the leadership of the department improves your training, your knowledge? Do they assign you distinct roles and authorities? Is there some kind of diffusion of knowledge? All those years that working in the bank, I was providing bottom to top knowledge and data. The point is to have this procedure top-bottom. And again, risk manager and monitoring, which was explained excellently earlier, the risk and control self-assessment, all those are the internal audit system. And fraud awareness, you need to be aware and prepared to detect the first signs of a fraud, particularly in very sensitive sectors, procurement, healthcare, services, football, and so on and so forth. And again, be prepared to conduct special investigations relevant to fraud and corruption, be aware of the culture, be aware of the mistakes and the reasons why certain events did occur. Continuous auditing and monitoring, which was explained earlier. You need to have skills and get some kind of specialization if you wish, and of course be prepared to communicate. You need to speak little and listen a lot. I had one more slide to show you. However, in the second version I missed it. So let me explain what was on. A last slide explain how the public sector can help the internal audit, because we all need some kind of help. So disseminate the standards, struggle to adopt them and implement them in your work. We've been struggling for some kind of protection when an auditor denounces some kind of fraud or corruption. So let us work together to build together a joint internal audit excellence centers where we shall be promoting the profession and all those scientific issues relevant to our work. Thank you.
Do they want to ask something?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Okay, before we...
Πρωτού ξεκινήσουμε,
And I want to thank you very much, Vera, for joining us here. And I also want to mention to you that Vera has been elected on the European Commission Institute of Internal Auditors Executive Committee. So you have a Hellenic representative for all of you, and you start. When did you start your? In December. And I must confess, as auditors, we're supposed to give our biases. My bias is towards the IIA. A lot of the things, when I don't know something, I go to this website of the IIA, and because I'm a member, I can gather all this type of extremely useful, detailed, excellent research. And in fact, in Canada, as I mentioned this before, all internal auditors are members of the IIA. And there's this saying that, you know, if you go back, John F. Kennedy, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. This is very much the situation here. We should be asking not what the IIA can do for us, but what we can do for the IIA, because the IIA is our professional body. And as if we're going to professionalize the internal audit function, we've got to be members. take the step to get certified. Definitely, and here's a really critical part, is get involved. Get involved, go to their committee members. They've got a lot of committee structures you can get involved with, and you can start running and be very active. You'd be surprised how much you learn. So before we let you go, Vera, I'm going to ask if there's any questions that you'd like to pose. Okay, we have one here.
I would like to mention the exploitation of the acquis of this authority of yours by the public sector is important, but we live in risk societies. That is to say, the risk is something of a part of everyday life. I mean, constitutionally, this is unacceptable to say that the society we live in is a risk society. What do I mean by that? The big audit houses were not only auditors of company fraud, but they were advisors. That is to say, the private ones have exhausted their role. They audit and they cancel as well. And I'm talking about independence, because independence is a very complex issue. In Greece, we have a very peculiar political administrative system that tries the public sector gradually to become, to make independent the administrative issue from the political issue. But you know, in Greece, such things like the public sector and the private sector are interwoven. Therefore, the standards must be legislated, because if not, there is no commitment. It is not just a part of law, it must be a law. Therefore, I believe that a transfer of acquis of external audits into public sector is acceptable. One more question, perhaps. I would like to ask all this process of certification that you mentioned earlier on, and the time period that is necessary indicatively, does it include any cost? Yes, well, I'll answer to you, because that's what I do in the National Bank of Greece, because the institute is volunteering. I do it for young or new auditors that come in the bank. There is some cost. The cost is pre-estimated as follows. If you take the tool which IIA provides without training, just the tool, which is electronic, and together with the exams, the examination fees, it comes up to $1,300. That's the cost, $1,300. That's for the certification. Now, to be member of the Institute of Internal Auditors is a year contribution, subscription, which is quite low. But you can give us a ring, and we can analytically explain everything. I would like to tell you that we are public servants, and based on the Constitution, the public is obliged to train its employees. Therefore, this cost, if it were adopted by the state, it should be undertaken by the state and not by us individually. Yes, and in the bank, that's what we do, very rightly so. And the exam fees, and the training cost, and the educational material.
Two.
I would like you to inform me, is there a restriction in the scientific background of the people who want to be certified? Of course, does it have to do with economics or other background? There are some prerequisites, some conditionalities. You must have some kind of a background. However, of any background, no, you don't need to have graduated from an economics university. You may be a law graduate. I have a friend here who is an engineer, for example, from technical institutes as well. Become members, only 10 people, less than 10 people from the public sector in our institute. We are waiting for you. Thank you.
Okay, so before I hand it over to Yanni, Mr. Slemets, to close the day, I was just going to say a few things in terms of the technical report that we're preparing. And given the time is short, I'm not going to go on and on and on. But I will say that I want to start by saying thank you very much. And thank you very much to the General Secretariat Against Corruption. With their help, we have met with a good number of you. In fact, we've met with over 26 organizations, 60 individuals, and we really had long and lengthy discussions. The days would start at 9, they would end around 5, 6, and one of the things that's true for Greece, as it's true for any country that I've visited, is that the auditors are very passionate people, have very strong views, and you're definitely here to see and have some type of impact and effect and improve public service. And that's exactly what this technical report is all about. What we're looking at is we're doing a mapping analysis of the audit, the oversight structure, and we're also looking at a gapping analysis. So as my friend Anglos Binny said, we're doing some mapping and some gapping. So, and right now, after meeting with all of you, what we've been able to do is we're going to be submitting a report. We'll be working with the General Secretariat and their team in terms of as we review it. The critical thing is that we come up with a report that is useful and is going to help move the modernization of internal audit forward. And really, what the key purpose of this report is to lay the foundation for the tools, the hands-on tools that we're going to be creating to assist you to modernize internal audit. So if I think about some of the areas that we're going to be addressing,
Do you want to use the deck?
Not really, no. Yeah, I'll just talk because I can't see it anyway. There's basically 6 areas that, and obviously each one of these areas is very broad, but these are areas that you raised to us, and areas that as we look at them, then we're going to be looking at hands-on tools that assist them. The first is developing and implementing an oversight strategy, including clear governance structure, defined roles and responsibilities. That's not something that we can do for you, but it's definitely something that we're going to give you options and considerations in terms of how to develop strategies around that. And a number of you identified the need to, identify overlapping, stop duplication, and come up with strategies that are going to make your work more effective, and make sure that the directions that are being provided to the oversight are clear. So starting off, and you've seen a number of strategies presented to you here today. The 3 lines of defense model, that is a strategy. Might not necessarily be a strategy for you, but you have to come up with a strategy of your own, but we will be providing tools in these areas. The second is moving from reactive to proactive risk-based control activities. And we saw that we had a good discussion led by Mr. Collins from the UK in terms of risk. How can we actively promote risk? I think Pepe had an excellent idea in terms of, because we can't always assume that risk is forward-looking, because who knows what's going to happen in the future, but we've got to leverage the information that we have now, and we have an awful lot of information that all of you produce on a regular basis. The question is how can we capture that information so that we can use it to identify potential future risks, but as well as how can we capture that information so that we can, moving forward, have a complaints management system that's going to, enable us to triage how the complaints are coming in and identify those that are higher risk as opposed to lower ones. So the complaints management is definitely a component that links up with what we're doing here. We're going to be having a session tomorrow on complaints management, so we're going to dive deeper into that. But that's just an example of how we may, there's certain, as you mentioned, you might not have highly developed risk analysis, but there's steps that we can take to develop tools around that. One is the one that Mr. Binney showed today, and that is the risk self-assessment tool that we as auditors can be working with managers to help promote them to use that. Third is skills development, and viewing skills development fundamental to success. Now, skills development, one of the things that came out loud and clear from all of you is the need for training. And so we've engaged having discussions with the school, with the IIA to identify some options that we want to present to the General Secretariat in terms of how we can make training sustainable, because cost is definitely an issue, but having some training that's actually accessible and provided on an ongoing basis, but training that is founded on IIA standards, because one of the things that have been said is that we don't want one-off training. The training has got to be based upon the manual that we create. So we'll be coming up with recommendations in terms of how we can come up with a training program that's going to meet your needs, and it'll be based upon the manual, like I mentioned. Fifth is successful oversight requires distinct, mutually supportive roles, all actors being involved. If we recall, there's two roles for internal audit. One is the consultative role, and the other is the assurance role. And one of the things that we're going to be doing in this manual is really pushing you on the consultative side of being an internal auditor. A number of you were loud and clear again that a number of our auditees are not ready to be audited. So it's incumbent upon us as auditors to develop the skills so that we can work with program managers and help them get audit ready. So a couple of things that come to mind: we're going to be doing a pilot of one of the departments. Health has been mentioned, but nothing's been decided yet. But I think one of the first steps that we would like to do is work with you, train that pilot anyway, in terms of how to undertake control self-assessments, and then engage with the management of that department and educate them on the role of control self-assessments, and then have them undertake them and roll them up. Another tool is audit readiness tools, and audit readiness tools combined with control self-assessments, I believe, are two tools that you can help actually get your organizations ready to be audited, because there's no sense in jumping to an audit, internal audit, and a systemic examination if they are not ready. There's an old saying, you never audit something that you know what the answer is going to be. So that is an important part. The other part that we're going to be focusing on is a maturity model for the internal audit manual. And the IIA has a maturity model, and it's a great model, but I think it's a little too detailed. We're going to make something a little more simpler, but it's going to be a step-by-step approach in terms of how to establish an internal audit function, and part of that is going to be focused on the human resources. So a number of you identified the need for job descriptions, competency profiles. So we're going to be developing those types of tools as part of the manual, and again, they're going to be, really high level but basic job descriptions and competency manuals, competency profiles that you can use to move it forward. And I skipped actually number 4, emphasis on recruitment staffing practices. Again, staffing practices are fundamental to independence. And a number of you have come out and you've said, look, you know what, because we're seconding our people into our units, they can be taken like that. And so it's very difficult to have an independent audit function when you do not have permanent staff. So again, we can't make decisions. It'll be the Greek government who makes decisions. It'll be the General Secretariat and yourselves and so forth. But we can come up with recommendations. Recommendations such as registries and those kind of options, and look into to those kinds of possibilities. Finally, introducing a sustainable culture of oversight and accountability. that part of it really comes down to education. So one of the things we want to do is we want to develop some tools around educating, particularly ministers' offices and senior management offices, about the role of internal audit. Because if there's not an acceptance of internal audit, then it's pretty hard to do an internal audit. You'll be on your own. So you have to. A big part of what we have, the challenge before you, is to create a culture that understands internal audit and is open to it. So again, we have a deck here. We'll send it out to you so you can read it in more your leisure, and then the actual report itself will be coming out in a few months' time. But there's one thing I do want to actually just hit upon, and one of the things we'll be doing in order to facilitate the manual is we're going to be sending out a questionnaire. I mentioned this to a number of you. We have now a draft of the questionnaire. We've got some excellent feedback from the General Secretariat, and so we're going to be fine-tuning it. So I anticipate us going out with the questionnaire to you in January. No sense in going out in December. Everyone's going to be leaving soon for holidays. And there's 4 areas of this questionnaire. One is going to be organizational characteristics. The other one is going to be professionalism. It'll be kind of a bit of a needs assessment there. The other is going to be performance measurement. And then the 5th one is going to be the needs assessment around the e-platform, because tomorrow we're going to be doing a bit of a needs assessment around the e-platform. This is going to go more in depth because the e-platform, we've been tasked to come up with a terms of reference for an electronic e-platform to assist you in doing your work. And as we mentioned earlier, risk planning isn't, entering into a computer and asking them to spit out, the risk indicators. We really have to develop a data repository where we have access to things like your reports and so forth. So we're going to be working with you in terms of identifying what the key indicators are on that. But let me just make a mention in terms of performance measurement, because I think performance measurement is critical for a number of reasons. We have gone through and we looked at the number of reports, and the report that the General Inspector of Public Administration puts out annually in terms of the work of all the investigatory bodies. And so one of the things that we're going to be promoting in terms of recommendations is how to improve the measurement of the outputs and potential impacts of your work, because being able to get senior management on board, if you could tell a performance story, it is so much more compelling, and senior management are much more apt to support you, because really one of the reasons why we have these large meetings and we've been holding and engaging with the ministers and whatnot is to get them on board, get them bought into this idea of the importance of internal audit. And this morning, the minister that we heard was just fantastic in my mind. He really just nailed the need for internal audit, the need for a culture of based upon values and ethics. So if there's more ministers out there like that, I think that are the way forward in terms of modernizing internal audit is going to be positive indeed. So at that, if it's all right, I'll pass the mantle to Mr. Slemis to close our day.
Thank you very much, Terry. I will not delay you, ladies and gentlemen. It's almost 4:30. There are just few of us left. Let me talk to you about some practical issues that many colleagues asked for the certification of participating into this seminar. Leave us your email so that we can send the certification for participation electronically to you. Let me also clarify that the absence of Mr. Papagelopoulos, the Minister of Justice, who is responsible for corruption issues, and Mrs. Gerovasili, the Minister of Ministry of Reconstruction, they were called for an extraordinary meeting with the Prime Minister. They were not possible to come here, but it is sure that, like Mr. Flabouraris, that he managed to come, and the other two ministers, they definitely support this effort for internal audit. We have talked many times about these issues, and Mrs. Gerovasili, who is now working on this issue, and in place of Mr. Bernardakis, who was an excellent knowledge of this issue, has undertaken to reshape all the organograms, although they are quite recent. In 2014 they were drafted, and in this framework we believe that the internal audit units in the ministry will be at the top. As regards the certification that was mentioned by the president of the Hellenic Institute of Internal Auditors, we are at advanced talks both with the Institute as well as with academic bodies, institutions and international organizations that are based in our country in order to achieve the professional certification with relevant certificates and exploiting the international experience, but also the academic upgrading of the auditors through programs of postgraduate level according to the current legislation, and we are talking about two programs of postgraduate level. One will have to do with auditing and the other the anti-corruption and organized crime, and it will be distant learning. Now, in the opening speech that was made this morning on the 5th of October for the cooperation with the OECD and technical assistance, if you remember when you participated, that the Deputy Minister of the Government, Mr. Dragasakis, had mentioned the importance of internal audits, saying that any cases of corruption we address, any cases that we bring them down to the end, if this is not combined with the replanning, restructuring of processes, the increase of safety level of internal safety valves of administration, so that they will not allow the repetition of such phenomena. If we do not see what happened in the past, what did not work out, then we will have the same phenomena appearing again. And here is the role and the importance of internal audit. Talking, therefore, about the system of audits in our country and taking into consideration what has been mentioned before, it is imperative to see what happened before and what's going to happen after with the auditors. In the past, let's say, provision of incentives so that someone can work in these posts, but also to make sure that the knowledge that he has acquired after huge experience and a great effort that he himself has invested will not go away, but they will be exploited if this person, for example, resigns or becomes a pensioner or retires from work. This is extremely important because we have seen that a lot of people and their knowledge has been lost down the path. And also the protection of the auditors that Mrs. Marmaridou mentioned. In order to talk about independence, obviously we must have protection, sufficient protection of the auditors, no matter the role they play. Now, some things about what the speaker said today, a very important workshop today. And tomorrow we are going to have the consultation day. The issue of overlapping of audits that was mentioned is of our concern. It has been pointed out by the Ombudsman repeatedly. You know that Mr. Potakis, Ombudsman, has undertaken the responsibility, and we are in close cooperation on this issue in order to exploit the wealth of information that we have, since we have 10,000 of complaints every year to the Ombudsman, and therefore the auditing authorities can get this information and target and prioritize in a better way. Mr. Terhant mentioned to the number of audits and auditors. That's of extreme importance to see it in depth, because we talk about 600 auditors and thousands of audits. Therefore, we need to look in depth. Also, the unit, independent autonomous unit for big ministries and smaller organizations. This is of great importance for our country on the level of municipalities, because we are in an ongoing cooperation with the municipalities. The head of all the municipalities in Greece has detected the necessity to work for such groups to work in all municipalities, but we are going to set some population criteria so that the big municipalities will have their own unit and the smaller municipalities will have one unit to look after, especially small islands or whatever. But the action of every municipality is going to be monitored with the use of technologies. Electronic platform, of course, it is of great interest for better targeting and training of auditing action. An important issue also is the internal control where will report. We know that there is a problem in cooperation among ministers who are burdened with a series of activities, and therefore the units do not have the ability to come in touch with them. We have prepared a directive in order to define the specific person that will cooperate with the unit of internal unit, and from then on we examine the operation of Committee of Internal Audits, Mr. Maniatis and Mr. Souliotis, that we participated in a similar program a couple of years ago, and in this framework we are trying to put into practice, as Mr. Christou said, the General Secretary, we had the members that and the higher Committee of Internal Audits, which will report to the minister, and the bi-ministerial committee that has been set up under the presidency of the Prime Minister on audit issues and corruption issues. The ex-General Secretary, Mr. Vassiliadis, had produced a plan for internal audits which was adopted, and then it was introduced to the Government Policy Council under the presidency of the Prime Minister, and it was adopted as well. Therefore, the next period of time we need to process all these thoughts and proposals and to specialize them in specific actions. We talked for the commitment of the proposals. This is a consultation process before the final conclusion, where we have the self-commitment, the audited and the auditors are committed for specific actions. That is to say, to be committed, we shall see how we are going to define this term. Now, who is informed from the results of the reports? In Belgium, we talked about management and the auditing committee and the Prime Minister. In our country, we need to notify all these reports into a series of bodies, the Council, the General Accounting Office, and direct notification. Sometimes irrelevant issues reach to them. Perhaps we have an audit for birth certificates that comes to the auditing council, but it is not included in their competency. Therefore, we must see how to clarify and say which competencies are reported and which no. Conflicting interests between the audited and the auditor is a very important issue. That's why internal auditors are in the senior management and they do not execute competencies that belong to the sphere of other institutions. In summer 25, in an opinion of the Law State Council of the country decided on this. Also, the stages that are adopted by the public sector, that there are some circulars inactive, that they do not serve anything. Until recently, it is forbidden the operation of schools for candidates, preparatory schools for candidates who want to prepare for the exams or for the local authorities, for judge schools and so on. If you see on the state schools, they are being advertised and the turnover from this activity is millions of euros. Nevertheless, on a theoretical basis, if we apply the law, it's a non-legal issue. Therefore, we must see what we want. Either we are going to implement this circular or abolish it. Also, previous speakers mentioned also that there are executives in the ministries that support the internal audit and they do not undermine it. Here we have the opposite. I don't want to be unfair and I don't want to hide the good cases. The big majority of high executives and general directors do not support internal audit. They undermine it. They don't want it to operate, and it is one of the reasons that it has not been operating for all these years. Apart from the fact, of course, that we have had lots of different governments. Also, another issue that Mr. Binis is the efficiency performance report. In the last presentation of the annual report of the Auditing Council, the Commissioner for the budget said that we must keep to the rules, but we have to focus on the results and see what we achieve. She mentioned also the example of a motorway that may be constructed with 0% faults, but not have a destination. Therefore, we have 100% loss of resources. And as she said, that is where we must improve the internal audit. As regards, finally, the risk assessment and not risk management, there is no risk assessment, as some people said here today. Not even the simple assessment, that is to say, who is the recipient of the complaint, what is the burden, how important is the person who make a complaint from 1 to 5 scale, and the content, and to see what is happening. I remember in our body of inspectors of public administration, 1/6 of complaints were just from one person. Perhaps he was right, but the issue that you have one person, 236 complaints, is something that has to be examined. With these thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, let us close today and say that tomorrow is going to be a consultation day. The representatives of various bodies, internal audit and internal organizations will give their own opinion, answer specific questions, so that each and every one of us will see on a better basis the existing situation and see better the basis, the foundations on which we are going to build the new audit system with the technical assistance of OECD, who sent here executives that are interrelated with Greece, like Mr. Terry Hunt, who has a very close relationship with Greece, and if you have heard him in the past, you know that, and Mr. Angelos Binis, who has great experience and he knows very well the Greek reality, and therefore we will have the opportunity not to ignore what exists, but on this to build the new foundations of audits. Thank you very much. As Mr. Binis told me, tomorrow we are going to start at 9. If you see the program, yes, we start at 9 tomorrow morning.